Good evening, welcome to Mock Global News. Tonight, we turn our attention to the future of U.S. leadership and what it could mean for the rest of the world. As the possibility of a Kamala Harris or Donald Trump presidency looms large, the international community is watching closely. Each potential administration brings with it drastically different policies, alliances, and global strategies that could reshape the international order. From climate change to economic trade wars, from diplomacy to human rights, the consequences of who sits in the Oval Office will ripple far beyond America's borders. Let's explore what the world might expect under these two starkly contrasting leaders. A Kamala Harris presidency would likely follow many of the principles and policy directions of the Biden administration, which would have notable implications on the global stage. Harris would likely prioritize international alliances, strengthening relationships with key allies in Europe, Asia, and Africa. Her administration would likely focus on diplomacy and multilateral cooperation, addressing global issues like climate change, human rights, and global health. Harris would continue the U.S. commitment to international agreements such as the Paris Climate Accord, emphasizing the need for stronger collaboration with other nations to limit carbon emissions and transition to greener economies. Under her leadership, the U.S. might increase aid and investment in renewable energy technologies, particularly for developing countries. Harris's presidency would likely be a continuation of advocacy for democracy, gender equality, and human rights on the global stage. Her administration might push for reforms around LGBTQ+ rights, racial equity, and women's empowerment, and take a firm stance on human rights abuses globally. In terms of immigration, Harris would likely strike a balance between border security and humanitarian concerns, addressing the root causes of migration, such as conflict and climate change, while advocating for a more humane approach to refugees. Economically, Harris would likely pursue inclusive globalization, promoting fair trade deals that protect labor rights and address global inequalities. She could deepen ties with regions like Latin America and Africa while maintaining a competitive stance with China on trade and technology issues. Additionally, global cooperation on regulating big tech, digital privacy, and cybersecurity might become a priority under her leadership. A Donald Trump presidency, on the other hand, would bring a sharp shift from the Biden administration's policies. Trump's America First approach would likely see a reduction in U.S. involvement in international organizations like NATO, the UN, and the World Health Organization. His presidency could lead to strained relations with traditional allies, as Trump would likely prioritize bilateral deals over multilateral agreements, leading to a more transactional foreign policy. This approach could weaken global alliances and further isolate the U.S. on the world stage. In terms of climate policy, Trump's return would likely mean a rollback of environmental regulations, with a renewed emphasis on American energy dominance through increased fossil fuel production. This could hinder global progress on climate change initiatives and create tensions with countries focused on sustainability. Economically, Trump might revive his protectionist trade policies, potentially escalating trade conflicts, particularly with China. This could disrupt global markets and trade networks. Trump's geopolitical approach would likely focus on heightened confrontation with China, potentially leading to military and economic tensions in the Asia-Pacific region. His close relationships with countries like Israel and Saudi Arabia might continue, which could result in more aggressive stances in the Middle East, particularly concerning Iran. A Trump administration would also likely maintain a stricter immigration policy, reducing refugee intake and focusing on border security. Overall, a Kamala Harris presidency would emphasize cooperation, diplomacy, and global leadership on climate and human rights, aiming to foster stable international relationships. In contrast, a Donald Trump presidency would lean toward unilateralism, protectionism, and reduced global engagement, potentially leading to increased instability and tension on the world stage. Each presidency would thus shape the international order in very different ways, with Harris advocating for collaborative global efforts, while Trump would focus on advancing U.S. interests above all else. One thing is clear: the choice of the next U.S. president will not only shape the domestic future of the United States but also the global landscape. Whether it's Kamala Harris, with a focus on diplomacy, multilateralism, and climate change, or Donald Trump, With his nationalist, America First agenda, the rest of the world will be watching, waiting, and preparing. As we move closer to the next election, the world's eyes are fixed on Washington, as the direction of global leadership hangs in the balance. Thank you for joining us tonight on MOC Global News. We wish you a good night, wherever you are in the world.